Hey guys, video for our healthcare in Japan playlist. We've mentioned on a previous video, actually we're talking about suicide in Japan, and we mentioned briefly about mental health care in Japan and about how there's a bit of a stigma attached to it. It definitely is true. There is unfortunate stigma attached to anything to do with mental health here, and psychologists or counsellors or psychiatrists and counselling and that sort of thing is just not talked about. It's just not talked about. The only reference you ever really hear to it is often in relation to people who have killed themselves, unfortunately. You know, we attended a funeral not long ago for a person, an older guy who'd finished work and got depressed because he didn't have his job anymore and was retired and couldn't deal with it, and nobody knew. Everybody thought he was fine, and then he went off and hung himself. And at his funeral, some people were sort of whispering that he'd been sick. And in actual fact, it had been depression, of course. You know, he'd been sick, but you know, nobody sort of had been talking about it at the time. He hadn't been talking about it at the time. Nobody talks about it. So it's sort of, we've sort of said on a previous video that it's almost like there's less stigma attached here to killing yourself than there is to mental health, and it's sort of true. It's sad, but it's true that you know, people would be less embarrassed telling you that their uncle had killed himself than telling you that their uncle was in mental health care or under mental health care, or seeing a counsellor or seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist or something. So whereas in a lot of countries now it's sort of considered to be normal, isn't it? You know, a lot of jobs have counselling as an automatic part of them, don't they? You know, if you're a police officer or a firefighter or ambulance person or a soldier or anybody that has any sort of job where you have any sort of trauma at all, it's sort of considered to be part of the thing, isn't it? But unfortunately in Japan, who knows why, it's part of their complex culture with, you know, just doing your best and trying hard and not talking about your problems or your suffering or anything else, and that's, I mean, that's sort of the central to it, is nobody here talks about their problems. Nobody here talks about if they've got any struggle or anything like that. They just don't do it. We've made videos about that before as well. We made a video called Don't Complain about this very thing, that if you come to Japan you can't really complain. So we continue to get questions though, because people who either are just curious or people who are coming to Japan for a long period of time who might have some issues and might be a bit worried, or we've had emails before from people who take medication for different conditions like anxiety or depression or whatever, and they worry about being able to get them here. And to be honest, we've never been able to give any answers to these questions because you never see it. You never see it, you know. Very rarely would you see a clinic like a mental health clinic here. You just, you know, the normal doctors' clinics and the normal dentist clinics and things are all over the place here, but to see a counselling service sign or you just don't see it. You know, so anybody who's asked us about that, we've just sort of said to them, well, we don't know, hard to find, and no one wants to talk about it. So even if someone you knew happened to know. So anyway, what's developed is somebody that we know here, a Japanese person that we know here who does struggle with depression, and we didn't know about that, had a panic attack episode. So really sort of lost it for a while and couldn't do anything. So we took them to a mental hospital in the big city nearby here, and so that was a really interesting opportunity to look at this, because this is important information. We think our healthcare playlist is our most important. On our English friendly directory, where we have our English friendly businesses and so on, we think that the healthcare people on there are the most important information that we can give, because, you know, English friendly bars and English friendly hotels and things are all well and good and very useful, but the healthcare thing's a big issue, of course. And you could probably find someone here who might refer you to an English friendly dentist or an English friendly doctor or something, but mental health, if you had a mental health issue here, it might be hard to get anybody to admit they knew anybody. Unfortunately, sad but true. And even then, to be honest, you'd be taking a bit of a risk if you told co-workers, Japanese co-workers, or Japanese friends or neighbours or anybody around you in your life in Japan about any sort of mental health issue. It could cause you problems. It could cause you problems. It's possible because of the way that the thinking is here. It's sort of like it was in the West about these things, the thinking about this topic about 40 years ago or 50 years ago. So it could cause you waves. If it got out to your co-workers or to your employer, it could stop you getting promoted. It's possible. It's well possible. Not always the case, but well possible. So you'd be wise if you did have any issues when you were here not to discuss them with the people around you. As tempting as that would be, because in a lot of countries that's what we consider to be healthy, isn't it? You know, telling someone you get panic attacks or you get anxiety or you take medication for anxiety or anything like that is perfectly normal in a lot of countries, but we would strongly recommend not mentioning it here. It could have negative consequences for you here. Unfortunately, sad but true. It might not, but it might. So, we'll just let you know how our experience went. We took this guy to this big mental hospital, and a couple of things that we've been concerned about. People have asked us whether they could bring their medication to Japan, or if they couldn't, if it was possible to get medication, because we've said on that healthcare playlist before that Japanese doctors are really conservative with medication, and quite often it's really hard to get good medication here because they're just really conservative about it, you know, and don't like giving it out. So we were wondering if we were wasting our time taking this guy in there, and also weren't quite sure how they'd do it, how to go down. So we'll tell you how we down. We walked in, we sat down, he'd never been there before. They took us off to one side, there was a waiting area there, and then off to one side there was a table and chairs, and a really nice, friendly older lady came out with a clipboard and sat down with him and filled out all his information on the clipboard, and quite a lot of it. That's typical Japanese style. There was like 3 or 4 pages of it, but lots and lots of questions, and he sat there and answered all the questions, and she filled out all this form, and then we didn't have an appointment or anything, we just turned up. And so then we went and sat in the waiting area for about, probably no more than about 10-15 minutes, and then this same really nice lady came and collected him and took him off into a consulting room where he met a psychiatrist, and he came out probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes later with a prescription, and we went across the street and there's a pharmacy there, and they gave him 2 sets of medication. Don't really know what it was, but one set was he could take up to 3 of them a day, and it helped him relax, and he took one straight away, and within an hour he was cool. He'd been really, for those of you who don't know about these things, is a panic attack is a super high shot of adrenaline that comes on unexpectedly for no apparent reason, and then usually different people react in different ways, but what it is the brain then tries to explain it and will come up with what your problem is, and it's totally in the head, right? So the first thing, the adrenaline is real, and it comes on, big shot of adrenaline comes on, and there's no reason for it. So what happens is the mind tries to explain why the adrenaline has come, and it quite often, this guy didn't want to go outside. He thought if he went outside that something bad had happened to him, so he couldn't handle the thought of going outside. But different people have different other problems. I looked on the internet, apparently other people have problems, they think they can't breathe, they think they're having a heart attack or something. His problem was that he just thought he couldn't go outside, that something, if he went outside amongst people, that something bad had happened and it'd be embarrassing, is what he said. So I don't really know, but quite complex. But he was really beside himself, and you know, that's why we took him. He couldn't drive the car and he was a real mess, and we took him to this pharmacy, and he took one of these tablets, and within an hour he was sort of pretty close to being his normal self. And that was about a month or so ago, and he's been taking that medication, and she gave him sleeping tablets as well that he said are really, really good, and he's been taking them, and now he's fine. So couple of observations. Oh, the other thing we did was, while we were waiting for him to come back from the consulting room, we asked the staff at the counter if there was an English-speaking psychiatrist in the place, and they said yes. So there is actually an English-speaking psychiatrist. So we're going to put that particular place on our English-friendly directory, so that if you happen to be in Aichi and you happen to need a psychiatrist for some reason, you can go to this place, because the atmosphere there is pretty good. The waiting time was very short. He said that the psychiatrist he spoke to was actually a lady, which was very nice. They didn't hesitate to give him some effective medication, which was good. And all in all, it was quite a positive experience. So the other thing we noticed is the other patients in there really did seem to be pretty heavily drugged up. There was a lot of people shuffling around looking pretty well off the planet, so it would appear that at least the medication aspect of the mental health care in Japan, at least the medication aspect is happening anyway. So that was a big concern for lots of people. We've had a lot of emails from people, I want to come to Japan, but I'm really scared to come without my medication because, I have a problem with anxiety, I have a problem with depression, I have a problem with panic attacks or whatever else, and they need their medication. And our advice usually to those people is come with your medication and your prescription from home, and if it's not on the Japanese banned list, they'll let you bring it in if you've got your script, so it's in its proper jar with its script. They'll let you bring it in. If it's not on their banned list, there is some medications that they just won't let you bring in, even if you've got your doctor's certificate or whatever, because they're banned in Japan. You just can't bring them in. Anything with high amounts of codeine and things like that, they don't like. Interesting that the medication that they give you here comes in individual little packets. So if you're supposed to take one tablet, each individual tablet will be in a little square plastic bag, and it's stamped from a machine, and the machine will print out, like this guy had 90 of these little white tablets, and each little bag has his name and how many a day you can take and all the details about the drug written on it. It's all in Japanese, of course, and then they're all joined together, so you get this long strip of these little individual bags with the drugs on them, and so they can just break them all off so that they can have them individually in little packets. It's already tidy, but the point is too that that's how Japanese people are used to seeing it. So if you turn up here with medication from your own country, you got to make sure it's in some sort of proper, easily recognised, proper container with your prescription from your doctor or certificate from your doctor or something. So we made a video about that previously. It's on the healthcare playlist. So yeah, as far as the counselling, I asked him whether she talked to him much, and he's a pretty educated guy, and he explained to her, apparently he just sat down and told her what had been happening, and he said that she understood, and there wasn't a lot of discussion that went on. He's a fairly high pressure guy. He owns a company here, and he works pretty hard, so it's sort of pretty obvious that he's got a fairly highly stressful life, so she sort of didn't get into it. So as far as the quality of the counselling, that's hard to know. Just a bit further too, there are also foreigners in Japan who are counsellors, and there is quite a few of them, particularly in Tokyo. There's a few of them, there's a few good ones. Again, look on the English-friendly Japan directory. Obviously people wherever they live in the world have stresses and strains, and some people have different issues, but Japan can be extremely stressful for foreigners. It can, if you get stressed in your own country, come live in Japan, I guarantee you some extra stress, because it can be really stressful. When you're here long term, when you're here short term, it's usually all fun and not normally a big problem, but when you live here long term, it does have extra stresses that you won't have in your own country. So from that point of view, people can get stressed out, and so there are counsellors in Tokyo. There's counsellors all through Japan, foreigners Americans and Australians and New Zealanders, and we researched this for the English Friendly directory, and there's a few on there, and we're always looking to find more. So we really need, we think they're the most important listings, the healthcare people, so we're always keen. Anybody who knows any mental health people in Japan that are English friendly, please encourage them to get onto the directory. We've got to remember to put a link under this video, and please encourage them to get onto the directory, because what we're all about is hooking up English speaking people with English friendly businesses and healthcare people in Japan. And we think that these are probably the most important, the healthcare. So mental health, or any healthcare people at all, if you know any English friendly healthcare people at all in Japan, please encourage them to get themselves onto the directory. They can put a free listing on there if they want to, just so that that people can find them. Because in particular, even if your Japanese is pretty good, that would be a pretty tough one. You know, it was pretty hard to understand. A lot of that was medical stuff, of course, so that's why we don't really know what drugs, or I don't know what drugs it was that they gave him, because I didn't recognise the name. Sometimes you can recognise the katakana of medicine. If you look on medication, you can sometimes recognise what it was. Didn't really recognise it. There's a few things he said about his condition, about her, that I didn't really understand. What the doctor had told him about his condition, he told me, I didn't really understand. So it can be, medical stuff can be tricky. Same as a dentist, you know, go to a dentist or a doctor in Japan, and they start telling you what they're going to do to you, and even if your Japanese level is pretty good, you know, they'll use a lot of medical terms that you've probably never heard before. You know, maybe in English that'd be a tricky medical term, but put that term into Japanese, it can be a real mystery, which can be very stressful. And particularly mental health, if people are having a real tough time and they're struggling, obviously speaking to a foreigner is going to be better if you can speak your own language, and also foreigners are more likely to understand. You know, I can't imagine talking to a Japanese psychiatrist or psychologist or counsellor about how hard it is to be a foreigner in Japan. Can't help but imagine that they just tell you to try harder. Gembare, yeah, off you go, gembare. To be honest, but when we went to that hospital, that mental hospital, sort of on the way in there, I was sort of half expecting that's what they were going to say to him. It's a pretty terrible thing to think, but just because, you know, until now our experience of mental health care in Japan has been zero. Never seen any of it, never heard anything about it, just don't see it. So I just kept imagining on the way in that, you know, the normal Japanese way to deal with stress and strain is just to try harder, and just kept imagining that poor guy going in saying, I'm losing my mind, and that the doctor just saying to him, well, try harder, you know, gembare, gembare. Off you go, gembare. But no, good. So it's good news, guys. Good news. Those of you who've been worried about the medication, it appears that substantial medication's available. He looked really docile on the way back after seeing that doctor. So medications seem to be effective. He reckons the sleeping tablets are really effective. So that's all good. And these places do exist. And then yeah, counselling from other foreigners who can speak our own language is available as well, which will be reassuring to some people as well. So again, if you do know any English friendly healthcare people in Japan, please send them our way. And if you are in Japan or coming to Japan and you need any healthcare, please go to the directory, and hopefully there'll be some info on there that will be useful to you. So I know we're taking this a bit lightly. The reason that a little bit light about this was the relief, was that guy was really suffering, and we've had family members here who have killed themselves, and so we take that, you know, it's depressing. It's depressing. We know people in this town who killed themselves. You know, when we were looking at buying a house, 2 or 3 of the houses we looked at were available for sale because the people who owned them had killed themselves, and 2 of the houses were really, really cheap because the people who owned them had killed themselves at those houses, and Japanese people don't want a house where someone's killed themselves, and that's on our Buying a House in Japan playlist. Those people who watch that have already seen all about that. So this tone of, you know, and now and again the train line gets shut down. You know, they tell you there's been an accident and the train line's been shut down for 30 minutes. Well, You know, there's no accidents on Japanese train lines. Usually, it's somebody jumping in front of the train. So that underlying problem all the time is depressing. You know, when you know that outside Japan, these issues are addressed more freely, and that these people that are killing themselves here don't need to be killing themselves. But chances are, if they lived in another society where these things were viewed differently, they wouldn't be killing themselves. And you know, we made a video about that before, about the suicide in Japan. There's a cultural difference. It's a huge cultural difference. But as a foreigner living here, it's depressing when you know that people are doing that. You know, so that's why we're happy. We're happy to see, you know, because our feeling was there's no mental health care in Japan, and that everybody's only option is to kill himself. So to find that there is some good options, some viable options for people, and that there are some alternatives, is fantastic. So we hope that the foreigners that are watching this will take full advantage of the mental health care that's available in Japan, and we really hope the Japanese people who are watching this will feel better about getting some mental health care in Japan if they feel they need it. You know, the people in your life don't need to know. If you're worried about that, the people in your life don't need to know. Just quietly get yourself off to one of these places and get a good psychologist or psychiatrist or counsellor and get some help, because it's the best option. It's better for you than the other alternative, which destroys your friends and your family and makes everybody sad. If you decide to take your own life, it's not an option. It's not a fair option. It's not fair on anybody else. It's a selfish option. Anyway, hope somebody found that of use. Really hope somebody found that of use. More videos coming soon.